I feel like, we didn't see each other for like a week and a half, and now we're seeing each other almost every day. So we're back to our common routine.
Yeah, well, it's the afternoon too, so you're going to be okay. I know you get a little tired after lunch.
I'm okay because we've got an incredible guest today. But before we go to that, I just want to say, like, you're actually working today. I mean, your hair it shows that you're working.
But I had my cap on from the I just got out of the operating room like an hour ago, and then I ran up to so I'm actually in my office, which I never use um, for this podcast. It's very special, just for you and Rabbi Cosgrove. All
I
right,
think
well,
that's good.
welcome back to the Rabbi and the Other Guy. As always, the other guy, Matt Schocket. See, I actually remember to do the intro this time. Daniel would be so excited.
You've done it a few times in a row.
Yeah, I'm here with my good friend Rabbi Daniel A. Septimus, who is fed and ready for after lunch. All
I'm
right.
ready. I'm ready.
All right. Well, let's bring in our guest. We're really excited to have Elliot Cosgrove with us. So, Rabbi Cosgrove is the senior rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1999 and earned his PhD from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He is the author of 16 annual collections of selected sermons. I'm going to tell Neil just to read those and just repeat them for now on. And he's written essays and op-eds for a variety of Jewish publications, including the Jewish Week and the Forward. He's the author of a 2024 book, For Such a Time as This, on Being Jewish Today, which I'm sure we will discuss. I've read it actually almost 2 times now. He sits on the Chancellor's Cabinet of the JTS and on the editorial board of the Conservative Judaism. He's a member of the Executive Committee of the Rabbinical Assembly. He's also he's like way better at this than you are, Daniel. You're not on any of these things. He's an
a real
officer.
rabbi.
That's right. He's the New York Board of Rabbis and a member of the board of UJA Federation of New York. Serves as a rabbinical advisor on the interfaith affairs for the ADL. Is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He also serves on the board of trustees of Hillel at the University of Michigan, who you're wearing their gear, I think, right? There it is. And on the National Board of Governors of Hillel at the University of Pennsylvania. So, Rabbi Cosgrove, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much, Daniel. Do I call you doctor? Do I call you rabbi? What are we going to go by here?
You can call me Matt or the other guy.
You call me Daniel.
No,
we go very informal back in Austin.
Yeah, that's right. It was such a nice visit in Austin. What a beautiful community you guys have. It's like this palatial campus, and the Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. Never seen anything like that. It's awesome.
Yeah, we were very lucky here. We obviously, the Dell family gave the land, 25 years ago? Aren't we celebrating some anniversary soon, Daniel?
We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the opening of the campus of forming Shalom Austin, and they bought the land in the early 90s. So it's been in our possession longer, but about 25 years though of the actual renaissance of Jewish life here in Austin that Rabbi Cosgrove observed.
Yeah. It's not only gorgeous, but it's also like it symbolizes something, that you got the JCC, you got the Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. Like, as an outsider looking in, it's inspiring.
Yeah, it's great. We even moved like an old shul from Brenham, right, Daniel? Like how old was it? Like 100, 150 years?
1893 or so. It's the oldest active synagogue building in the state of Texas.
So they put it on a truck and moved it to our campus. Kind of cool.
Yeah, in 3 pieces. It's pretty. There's the whole story's online somewhere, and from the Jewish Outlook. It's pretty cool.
All right. Well, we had the opportunity as Dr. Cosgrove. Now you're a doctor. That's your brother, right?
No, I actually have a PhD. You wouldn't want me to perform surgery on you, but I both rabbi and doctor. My mother would want that to be noted, that
That's true. She got 2 for 1.
That's right.
All right. So we obviously had a chance to meet you during Z3, and we talked a lot about, and I'm sure we'll get to some issues on some things in the book, but I kind of want to start. You're wearing your Michigan gear, right? And in the book, you talk about how you became a rabbi, which is not like you grew up wanting to be a rabbi. So I'm hoping you'll share that story with us.
Yeah, I tell the story in a book, but it's really a story about how I became a rabbi. And you're right, Matt. It wasn't. I never thought I was going to become a rabbi, though I do want to point out that my grandfather, who I never knew, he passed away just as I was arriving in this world, was a congregational rabbi in Glasgow, Scotland. A name like Cosgrove, where does it come from? It's a Scottish last name. But I grew up in Los Angeles, And I went off to University of Michigan, and I was having what I would say is a very typical University of Michigan career. It was I was proud of my Judaism, but I didn't express my Judaism in any way. It was what I did when I went home to see my folks. And so very typical in that sense. And I got a phone call my junior year, I always remember it, when a man named Mr. Gendon had died. And Mr. Gendon was sort of, he was a single guy. I never knew his family. I think there was a Holocaust survivor element to his story. And he would always come over to our home for Shabbat dinners or Passover Seders. He sat next to our family when we went to synagogue, gave me a peppermint, candy as a rabbi started. So that kind of like grandfatherly, as close as I got to having a grandfather. And he died. So I said, what would Mr. Gendon want? Because I got this phone call in my junior year that he had passed away at a ripe old age. And I said, maybe I go to Hillel. Maybe I say Kaddish. That he would want. And truth be told, I had never been to the Hillel before. I had been to the Union for high holiday services, but I had never engaged with Jewish life on campus. And I called up one of my Jewishy friends, and I was like, "Where's the Hillel?" And like, "You're an idiot! It's this huge building. If you know Michigan Hillel, it's like this gorgeous big building. You walk by it every day." And he said, "All right, so I'll go." I found out when services were. I sat in the back, said Kaddish, and I got up like it was the end of a flight to get out. And at exactly that moment, a guy, I know it's a podcast, but like boxed me out, right? Stood between me and the door and said something and said, "I notice you've never been here before." And I'm thinking, well, this guy has an astute sense of the obvious. I only found out this building existed about an hour ago. And he said, "Well, do you have plans for Shabbat dinner?" And truth be told, I lied because I figure he didn't want to hear about the dollar pitcher night at Rick's that night, which is where I was going. And then he paused and he said something that changed my life forever. He said, "Well, I bet you don't have Shabbat plans next week." And I was busted. I was caught. And I said, "No." And he said, without, breathing, he said, "Good. So you'll come over to my house for Shabbat dinner." And I did. And then I joined the Jewish, journalism thing. And then I led the Israel trip to DC that spring. And then there was a space on the governing board. And then I became a doctor and a rabbi. And here I am on your podcast today. But that story, and that man was the Hillel director. Daniel, you might know Michael Brooks, one of the great Hillel directors, and he's long since retired. But the point of that story was that his model of leadership wasn't just an institution builder, fundraiser, staff, everything. He also had a way of tapping people. I know that I'm just one of many people. The Jewish world is Federation professionals, JCC directors, rabbis, cantors that were tapped by Michael Brooks, who came out of Michigan. And it remains, very much the North Star of my rabbinic career. The idea of walking into shul, seeing someone for who it's a little awkward, you've never seen them before, and that simple act of just saying, "I notice you've never been here before. Hi," extending a hand, maybe even a dinner invitation. Like, it's actually not more complicated than that.
Yeah, I read an article on the Forward that you gave an interview for, right? And you talk about how even being a pulpit rabbi and with everything that you do, you still consider this to be a person-to-person job, right? As a rabbi.
Absolutely. It's a retail business. It's one soul at a time, dating back. I mean, I could go biblical, but Abraham and Sarah sitting at the tent, right? Greeting the passerbys and welcoming them in. But it's also like it's a spiritual demeanor. It's recognizing that access to holiness, God, if you like, Matt, I don't know what your theology is, but like it's not just a vertical enterprise. It's not just between us and the heavens. It's actually between two human beings, and that simple but momentous act of inquiring into someone else's well-being, that it makes look. I do it, Matt. You're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
And like I learned this from my dad, who's a doctor. Whenever he might stick someone in a waiting room, he's a urologist, and my brother's a urologist. I'm actually the black sheep of the family who didn't become a medical doctor. But
I'm the same way. Just so you know,
yeah.
my dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor. I'm the black sheep,
Yeah.
so I'm with you on that.
No, you know that joke about like, see that guy standing next to the president, or in my case, the Pope, on the family group chat, it was like his brother, he's a doctor. So that's sort of the politic of my family, of origin. But the point is, so my dad would share with me that as a busy physician, he always greeted his patients. He didn't send like the office staff. He greeted them in the waiting room, right? That simple touch. And so even now when I have bar mitzvah kids and I run a pretty large synagogue, like I always walk down, I always greet them, I always walk them into my office. Like, and I could give you a million examples of that, like just the small personal touch, happy moments, an email saying, I hope your surgery went well, calling someone, at the 30 days following the death of a loved one, like a million, do you ever see the movie Any Given Sunday with Al Pacino?
Yeah.
All right. That final scene,
Great movie,
with his locker room speech where he's talking about it's a game of inches, right? Yeah. So being a rabbi is a game of inches. It's wishing someone mazel tov. It's extending a condolence. It's a kind word. It's a follow-up call. Like the inches are everywhere. And the difference between a successful rabbinic career and an unsuccessful one is found in those inches.
That's so interesting. It's like, it's almost like you're paying forward what the Hillel director did for you, right? It was to your game of inches. If he doesn't stop you, then you may never become a rabbi, right? One little touch point changes your life and hundreds and thousands of people's lives.
Look, absolutely. And the amazing thing is, and now I'm 25 plus years. I've been at Park Avenue Synagogue 17 years. Now I'm like, whatever the right financial model is, now I'm getting the return on investment, right? The kids, now some may or may not become Jewish communal professionals, but like when I'm doing a wedding of someone whose bar mitzvah I did, or a bar mitzvah of someone whose baby naming I did, or someone's in crisis, or those intimate, conversations when a 27-year-old is making a life decision and they want to meet with their like that is just compounded in interest. I know I'm mixing my metaphors, but it's just like that is why you go into this business of being present and planting seeds, and the fruits of which someone will say to me. This literally happened to me last night. I was at the Daniel, I was at the Jewish Funders Network thing, and a young
You're in Nashville?
Yeah, I was in Nashville, and a Jewish communal professional who just won like a national award. And when I was living in Chicago, she was just out of the gates of her career. My wife and I had her over for Shabbat dinner. Now, I want you to know, I had no memory of it, right? But that's almost the whole point, right? She was like that simple gesture of like letting someone know that their humanity is seen. Like, and now she's like, one day she's going to be signing all our paychecks. And it was like, you set things in motion, and you don't even know. And it's a beautiful thing. I have the best job in the world.
Love that.
So obviously, you wrote the book. And for those of you who haven't read it, it's fabulous. Like I said, I actually listened to it. That's why when I first met you, I was like, I feel like I've been hearing your voice for weeks now, because you narrate yourself. So
Right.
why?
You've been giving it to your patients as an anesthesiologist. It just sets them right to sleep.
Well, that too. We actually, we put it right below their face as they're face down for their procedures. So, why the impetus to write the book now? I mean, it's incredibly important and it discusses a ton of topics which we'll get into. But why now as opposed to 5 years ago or 5 years from now?
Yeah. Look, some of the ideas long preceded October 7th. The book was actually written, just the mechanics of it. October 7th happened. I was given the opportunity to write a book, and the publisher wanted it at the 1 year point. And so it was an opportunity. I had been doing a lot of public advocacy, raising money, solidarity missions. We were all springing into action. I was doing my thing. I'm sure everyone found their own lane that they could. Some people call it October 8th Jews. Some people call it the Great Awakening, the tribal moment. I called it the Esther moment, and I'll sort of backpedal into the theme of the book. But the mechanics of it were, they wanted the publisher HarperCollins said at the 1 year anniversary. And so I thought of the various things I do. I write all the time. I preach all the time. I lead a community. And I thought that if I could try to make sense of this moment as the news was developing. Remember, I mean, look, the hostages are still hostages. We're 530 plus days in. Like, the war hasn't ended. One of the questions that we talked about as a publisher was, what if the book is released and like the war's over, the hostages are released, and I was like, let that be my problem. Let this be,
right.
And the unfortunate thing is the themes, and Matt, because you read the book, of diaspora Israel, of anti-Semitism, of the generational divides, of the toxic right? Every chapter of the book actually is as important, if not more important, right now. So just to backfill, and we just celebrated, I'm not sure when this is going to drop, but the festival of Purim, the springtime festival. And I use the story of Purim. So that's where the title comes from, for such a time as this. And it's this moment of time of biblical history where there was a Jewish community who lived in Persia. Many people are familiar with the story. And they felt that in the diaspora community of Shushan, the going was good. And they could somehow balance their Jewish and secular existence. And then the wicked designs of Haman come down, and Esther, whose Hebrew name actually means to hide, had hidden her Jewish identity in the palace of the king and risen up to the highest ranks. And when the chips were down and the Jewish community was on the line, Esther's uncle Mordecai, by way of an emissary, reached out to Esther and said, don't think you're going to escape with your life. And who knows if it was not for such a time as this that you arrived at your station in life. And we know how the story ends, and the Jews are saved. And then the Jewish community, Esther rises up as a queen, as a woman, and most of all as a proud Jew, and asserts herself. And I think this is really the story of October 7th American Jewry. There's a little bit, we can get into it on sort of geopolitics, but largely it's a story about American Jewry. And my contention is that in the face of being traumatized, we weren't paralyzed, right? I found what I did, raising money, advocacy, writing a book. I'm sure each of you and your respective communities found some way to have your own Esther moment. So a story.
You're on our Esther moment.
Is that the origins of this podcast?
It is. It's post October 7th for sure.
So you were like, we got to bring the Jewish conversation out in the open.
So Daniel was invited to go on one of the missions end of October of 23.
One of the JFNA missions that they did.
And he asked 400 people, and they all said no. So then he finally asked me, and I was like, sure, I'll go. And we went to Israel, and I stayed a couple of extra days and visited the kibbutzim in the south. With one of the MKs who was kind enough to invite me down there, whose sister happens to be one of our community members. So she set it up. And when we came back, I said to Daniel, we we did a few community events, and people were asking, I'm sure they ask Daniel this all the time, but for the first time, they're asking me, because I had gone, like, hey, how do I get more involved? I'm feeling like my Jewishness is reawakening, or I've taken it for granted. How do I get involved? And I said to Daniel, after doing a couple of meetings with different people, I said, we should start a podcast so we can talk about all kinds of different Jewish cultural events. Now, we're not the only one. I feel like there's 400 now, Jewish podcasts that all started after the 7th. But yeah, to your point, you're on our Esther project.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the story, right? That people, some people collected socks, some people went on solidarity missions, right? It's not about judging. Some people got involved politically and started supporting candidates who are good. Like everyone, you just have to look in the sort of in your quiver of arrows and see how you can make a difference. And I think, and we might get into this. Other question is also, please God, once the hostages are released and there's hopefully a cessation of hostilities, how we extend that beyond this moment. Like this podcast, like you're doing amazing things. You're bringing Jewish conversation out into the open, right? So what's the day after plan, and how do we extend the tail of what some people call the surge, right? Like I was just reading an article, Daniel, about that program One Table, a Shabbat dinner program, the way to have home hospitality. It's a magnificent program. They had like 105% boost in the young people. That's not like Jews in the pews or like signing up for adult ed class. Those are just people who want to be with other Jews for a Friday night dinner. Like doubled their numbers post October 7th. There are a million stories like that, but we got to keep it going.
We do. And we actually we're in the process, or we just hired someone who'll start in a few months, a young adult connector. So similar to the model, I came out of Hillel too before coming into this position as a director, and saw how incredible Hillel is at that engagement model that you described of kind of that one-on-one touches. And one of the things that we saw is that the more of these touches we make in the community with young adults and help them curate their own experiences, the more engaged they will get and the more community they will build with each other, which is critical. And you mentioned One Table, because One Table was so brilliant at creating that model for mainly the young adult Shabbat community, but now they're using it to engage people across the spectrum of life. So we're going to be using it to what we call our messy middle range, right?
Yeah.
The people that are pre-senior, but they're in the kind of growing into empty nesterhood, or they are empty nesters, and they're looking for things to do. And they're online as well, just like young adults trying to figure out how to connect with each other, especially in a community like Austin, where a lot of people have come here and they're looking for community and looking for ways to connect through Shabbat and other ways.
Yeah. I make the distinction in my book about Exodus Jews and Genesis Jews, and I use the model of Genesis, which is go forth from your land, that God calls out to Abraham, a very positive expression of Jewish identity. You shall be a blessing, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by you. That's a Genesis positive pull of what it means to be a Jew. The Exodus model is being defined by the other, right? The very first verses of Exodus, Vayakam melech hadash, that a new king arose who didn't know Joseph, who feared the Israelites to be a fifth column, and therefore the object of hatred, otherness, and ultimately servitude and oppression. And that's a negative push of being defined by the other. And what I explain in the book is, I say that prior to October 7th, American Jews, everyone found or didn't find, they may or may not have had a Genesis Jewish identity, but on October 8th, we all became Exodus Jews. We all felt either the anti-Zionism, the anti-Semitism. We all felt ourselves to be othered. And I think the question, Daniel, which is exactly what you're getting at, which is how can we sort of walk and chew gum at the same time, right? The threats are still there. We're not out of the woods, and I don't know when we're going to be out of the woods, but we can't give those who hate Israel and those who hate the Jewish people the right to define who we are, right? It was great to be a Jew on October 6th. It's great to be a Jew today. And so Shabbat, community, learning, mitzvot, all of the positive things that we do to be Jews, that's got to be our, the Genesis Jewish identity. We have to be able to put that foot forward.
You know who I think has always done a really good job of that, and obviously it's an Orthodox movement, but Chabad has always had that approach, right? The community and bringing people in, and a lot of different touch points. And I mean, I know my experience from Chabad on campus here, but Rabbi Zev does an amazing job of bringing kids, and I think he brings like 5 or 6 or 7 busloads of kids to Israel for birthright every year. Obviously, that's been delayed by recent events, but I have always thought that they did a wonderful job of community building, and maybe we can learn something from them without the Orthodox tradition that, because plenty of Jews don't want to be Orthodox.
Look, my take on that is, right, when the history of the Jewish people, or the last 50 years is written, it's not, the headline's not the Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative, it's Chabad. That is a denomination that's made the biggest difference in American Jewish life. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, Matt, this idea of an authentic, non-judgmental, come as you are, right? Whoever it is, we welcome you. We're not, if you're going to eat lobster bisque on your own time, that's your call. But when you walk into this space, you are welcome. No judgment, no guilt. And I think Chabad understands something about the American Jewish soul. Now, because I am who I am, right, and I know, also the theology of Chabad, that the sort of fundamentalist aspects of their theology, they would never, speak from my pulpit. They would not, there are certain lines
right.
That a Chabad rabbi will not cross: issues of gender, issues of sexuality, issues of the status of the non-Jew, right? For me, there's like 20 good reasons I would never be a Chabad rabbi. But let me tell you, we can steal out of their playbook. The notion of being a non-fundamentalist Chabad, I think, is a calling card of the Jewish people right now. It goes directly back to the Michael Brooks story I told you about from University of Michigan, right? That that story, that was this outreachy move.
Yeah, well, they create communities. They do it really well.
They create communities, and Rabbi Eric Yoffe, it must have been either 03 or 04 when I was in my second year of rabbinical school. It must have been 03, actually. At the Minneapolis Biennial for the URJ, for the Union for Reform Judaism, and Rabbi Eric Yoffe was the head of the Reform movement at the time, got up and said, we need to be more like Chabad on how we engage people within our community. At the time, that was somewhat of a controversial statement, but I think that was very forward thinking of Rabbi Yoffe to really push that to our movement to kind of evolve to where people were at the time and continue to be. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from them and should be, basically engaging on.
Yeah, what's the joke about the Chabad rabbis? If you want to find a Jew, send the Chabad rabbi out, right? He'll always find him. And they do a wonderful job. I mean, they come to my house what's the lulav and the etrog?
Yes.
On Sukkot, they come and knock on my door every year. And then we've got the guy that drives around with the menorah on his car, right? They do it.
Right. Look, they know if I were to put it in market terms, the conservative and reform movements are seeking the same market share as Chabad. They're just two totally different tactics, and I think we can learn a lot from Chabad.
So I'm going to move. It's kind of the same topic, but a big part of your book is Maya, right? Who I understand is not a real person, but it does go.
It is a real person, not a real name.
Not a real name, right? And so, but it does go to this idea of engaging people with Judaism, right? And trying to figure out, with changing ages and changing society, how we keep people involved. And so, will you tell the story that's in the book, and
Yeah.
then we can talk about it.
So Maya's a real person. She actually grew up. She's not one of my children, but she's one of my kids' best friends. And at any time of the day or night, would be at my kitchen table. And I sort of joke that she shares half a brain with my kids. There's something very personal about the book because I have 3 college-age kids, 1 just out of college, so 4 total, I think. And conversation, the book is like an intergenerational conversation of how to talk not just amongst ourselves but also our children and grandchildren. So Maya is a product of Jewish day school. I call her Maya because every one of my kids' names has 2 consonants and 2 vowels. It's like Neely, Tali, Nava, Romy, like everyone's 2 consonants, 2 vowels. So I picked Maya. And she said, Elliot, Rabbi Cosgrove, I noticed you have a Israeli flag on your bima, right? A national symbol, not a religious symbol. And I noticed you have the prayer for the state of Israel in your service, right? And as she's like pulling me in, I realized that, and she spews out this sort of non-Zionist manifesto that she can't square the circle of her progressive, proud Jewish identity with the right-wing policies of the present state of Israel, and she's basically giving expression, and Maya becomes the Mayas, right? The Gen Z non-Zionists, and how do we deal with them? What do we do? And what I propose in the book, and I model the actual conversation of how do we engage with the Mayas, and I'll say sort of to be curious and not furious, right? I know where, I can't imagine a Jewish identity without Israel being at its center, right? But we're all a product of our own experiences. And for the Mayas of the world, they only have one prime minister that they have any memory of, and that's Netanyahu. They only know one policy, which is an expansionist policy into Judea and Samaria. They only have one paradigm, which is Israel as the Goliath to the Palestinian David, right? That's their reality. You can't tell someone that their reality is not their reality. And so, and then, the Jewish community, I think, and this is one of the more controversial claims of my book, I think made a wrong turn along the way. Because as sure as I am that Israel and Zionism are a foundational building block with what it means to be a Jew today, Judaism is not Zionism, and Zionism is not Judaism. And what I call it tongue-in-cheek, the OJC, the Organized Jewish Community. Somewhere along the way, we made the ticket of entry into the Jewish conversation, the OJC, to be assent with the Israeli government, whoever that might be. And so, Arthur Hertzberg, one of the great rabbis of yesteryear, once said, the only thing that you can be excommunicated for as an American Jew is dissent with the Israeli government, right? And so then you have the Mayas trying to square the circle of what's going on in Israel, and then we act surprised when they feel themselves that the Jewish conversation is inhospitable to them, and so my and there's a lot more I could say about this, but they were marginalized. They were marginalized twice over, right? They were traumatized on October 7th by the horrors of that day, but they were also marginalized because they felt that the response of the Jewish community was Israel right and wrong. So they were feeling it from both sides. And my argument is that we have to have this, not that every view is equal, right? But, we're about to celebrate the festival of Passover, and we have 4 children at the table. The child who is a second child, that we call him the wicked, the insolent, the provocative child, whatever you want to call that child, right? You do say, it actually says you rap them on their teeth, but you also make sure that they're still sitting at the table. So it's how to have an expansive, inclusive, big tent attitude where every voice is at the table, but also, draw boundaries at the same time. And so what I suggest is that, we have to listen, right? The ABCs, right? A is for acknowledge. B is, when you hear that non-Zionist view, breathe, right? Just breathe. And C is choose. Choose how you're going to respond, right? So say, okay, Maya, you don't believe in a state of Israel. Fine. 47% of the global Jewish population lives in that spot named Israel. There's Hezbollah to the north, Hamas to the south, Houthis firing missiles, hostages still in captivity, Iran with designs to destroy Israel and repeat October 7th and again and again. What are you going to do? What's your game plan, Maya? And then do the most important thing of all, just shut up. Stop talking. Have that young mind give expression to the best alternative to a sovereign state of Israel, given the threats that Israel faces. Now, what will not happen is Maya in that conversation won't concede your point and say, I'm glad we had this argument. You're right. I'm wrong. But I think I look at arguments not as winning or losing in the room. I view arguments as planting seeds for the future. And so then when that Maya comes back to campus, she's going to think twice because she feels that she's been heard, and she feels that she's been given a chance to be included in the Jewish conversation. I do believe that that thoughtful conversation, she will be far more intentional about standing, or hopefully not standing, next to someone with a placard that says "From the river to the sea," or calling for a global intifada. And so I look long on the Mayas of the world. I think we have to have a very expansive view.
No, I agree, and I think there's no other way to do it. You never have an argument with somebody and they go, you know what, you're totally right and I'm totally wrong. I'm going to change my mind immediately. And Daniel and I, and if you go back and look at some of our old episodes, we had Nomi Colton Max of the New Jewish Narrative on a couple of episodes ago, and when she was coming to Z3, very controversial, and I didn't receive a lot of flack, but Daniel probably got 455,000 emails about why are you having this person. And I said, not only should we have this person, but we should have her on the podcast and we should have this discussion. And, it's interesting that you say, anti-Zionism means against the government of Israel. And what I think and I agree with you I think we lost the narrative there. And what we really should be talking about is the state of Israel as a mythical thing, right? And the government of Israel is something else. And I think there is a place to be in support of the concept of Israel, right, as a sovereign Jewish state, and then to be able to say, but that Ben Gvir guy is a nutcase, and who wants him in charge?
Look, there are hundreds of thousands of people who protested this past Saturday night against the government as an expression of their love of country, right? And so the Mayas of the world, Mayas describe much more than just Gen Z. It describes an aspect of all of us and the organized Jewish community, right? The idea that one is somehow a traitor to the cause for expressing love of Israel, but dissent with the Israeli government, right? Now, it's different because we're in a time of war, right? So I think the stakes are a little higher than normal. But remember, prior to October 7th in 2023, there were, I don't know what it was like in Austin, but here in New York, there were all these protests against the judicial reform being legislated and proposed by the Israeli government. And that was when Israelis and American Jews, for the very first time in my career, Daniel, I don't know what it's been like for you, but actually said, if you care about Israel, then you will protest this proposed legislation. And that was actually a sea change, that what was treif became kosher at that moment. that one can express one's Zionism, even if that means expressing dissent. We have to be careful because it's war. But anyway, Daniel. Yeah.
Well, no, I was going to say that to your point on that, that was the first time that I can recall in my professional career where Israelis were actively advocating for American Jews and diaspora Jews to speak up against certain elements of the judicial reform. I cannot recall a time in my career where Israelis were actively asking us to do that. Usually it's the opposite. Please stay out of the conversation. And then on the second piece, that was one of the arguments that I was hearing about. Why are we bringing Anomi Colton Max to the conference? It's because we're at war. Why are we bringing her at this time? Bring her when things are calmer. And, from my vantage point, the Mayas of the world are not going to wait for the war to end. And actually, right now, this is the moment where I feel like they can be engaged the most. Because they're actually thinking about it, and I felt that a lot of people at least have reopened their minds to a conversation, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to have that conversation with people in our own community here in Austin. I'm sure it's the same for you up in New York, or wherever you're talking with people, to be able to have that conversation together and to kind of build a tent together that's different than maybe what it looked like pre-October 7th.
Yeah.
I remember. Go ahead, Elliot.
No. I just was going to agree with Daniel. I think a little bit of a self-audit and a course correction to have, again, not every view is kosher, and not every organization. Look, there's no, I a very tight grip on who's allowed to speak in my synagogue and who's not. Right? Every idea is not kosher, but we have to have an expansive view of what it means to be to be a Zionist.
I remember when you introduced yourself at Z3, Elliot, you came on stage and you said, being a rabbi in New York is great because everybody agrees with you all of the time. And I thought it was like one of the best lines of the entire conference, because I can't imagine. I mean, the Jewish community in New York is significantly, orders of magnitude bigger than the Jewish community in Austin. I know what Daniel goes through on a pretty well daily basis in terms of opinions. You probably have 10 or 100 times that number, so it must be difficult.
Yeah.
We've only got a couple minutes left. I want to ask one more question. This goes back to the book of Esther, and interestingly, I was at an IAC event right around the same time as Z3, and the speaker mentioned, what's interesting about the book of Esther is that God's not in it, right? Nowhere is God mentioned in the book of Esther. And the takeaway that I took from that is, and especially with relation to how you relate it to modern times, is this is on us to solve, right? God's not coming down to the heavens to fix this for us. And I think that you express some really good ideas in the book for how we can move forward.
Yeah. Look, I spot on, Matt, that the Esther story, God's hiddenness, is also a call for human agency, right? That unlike other books of the Bible, Esther tells us, like Esther did herself, we got to take action in our own hands. I give sort of a 3-point thought in my book, and that sort of really been something that Z3 represents as well, and a lot of like-minded colleagues. Number one is, I think we need to know our story. The simple definition of Zionism as the right of the Jewish people to live in their indigenous homeland, right? I think we need to send our kids, grandkids, we ourselves need to be proud of that story. It's a winning story. Zionism is not some late stage colonialist enterprise. It goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, thousands of years of longing for the land, the return of the people to the land. This is a great story and one that we should be proud of. So that's step one. Step two, and this goes a little to the Maya conversation, I think we have to be aware that there are counter narratives to that story. I think it's educationally unsound to have our children head off to campus, and the first time they encounter someone saying that their story is not the story, it should not be in the campus quad or diag, right? That we have an obligation to our kids to teach them that the point, counterpoint, the history of the Middle East. And then the third, and this really also flips back to everything we've been discussing, is that we have to make sure that our love of Israel, our Zionism, is not a substitute for our Judaism. We need, and it's not a surprise, Matt, I'm a rabbi. Like, I love Jews, I love Judaism. Like, to be literate, to be loving, to be engaged, community-minded, doing mitzvot, looking at your Jewish life as a constantly evolving and growing experience, asking you yourself aspirationally, not who is the Jew I am today, but who's the Jew I'm going to be tomorrow, right? We have to put all our chips on the Jewish soul, because I do believe, A, because I'm a believing Jew, but B, I think that a Jewish soul, a Jewish human being who has what sociologists would call a thick Jewish identity, can withstand policy differences between the latest news cycle out of CNN, right? But if all your Judaism is the latest ceasefire talks or whatever it is, then it's going to be a paper thin identity. And so both substantively and tactically, we got to double down on Jewish identity. 3 steps: know your story, know the other story, and know your Judaism.
I think
Very
that's the
important.
perfect place to leave it.
Yes, thank you. It was great to hang out with you again on this podcast. And I actually think we may have been in Israel together, Matt and I. Were you on the UJ trip at the end of October in 23? There was like
I've been on a bunch since. So
yeah, there was a big UJA contingent. We had a couple that were going back
it was
and forth.
clergy. It was all clergy. It was all rabbis, I think, that were on that trip. And I could have sworn you were there.
We rabbis, we all look the same.
I think I know the difference between you and some of the rabbis at Central Synagogue. I can distinguish.
Guys, you're doing amazing work. I'm so honored. It's like this taste of the heaven I had when that weekend I spent in Austin. So invite me back.
We would love to have you back.
We would love to have you back for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Right. It's awesome. All right.
Thank you,
Thanks
Rabbi.
for listening. And we will see you guys next week back here on the Rabbi and the Other Guy.